we have collaborated together on designing and creating this webinar for you. So before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. So firstly, this session will include a presentation. We also would like just to remind you to make sure that your microphone is muted, and we have enabled the chat box, I believe. So we do encourage you to maybe ask questions or place comments into the chat box as the night goes on, and we'll do our best to answer them. So most of us here are probably primary school teachers, and we know that the CUSON framework for professional learning guides the professional development of primary school teachers in Ireland as per the Teaching Council's guidelines. So with that in mind, we have designed this webinar to ensure that it aligns with the principle of CUSON. We are presenting a mixture of research and practical ideas in the area of literacy, and we'll also be covering elements of the art subjects as well. At the end, we will encourage you really to reflect on your own practice and the learning from this webinar, and maybe see how you can apply the research and the strategies into the direct context of your particular classroom. So as you can probably tell from the webinar title, we're looking at creative pedagogies for oral language development. So with that in mind, there's two dimensions to the webinar, oral language and creativity. So we're going to start by defining some of our key terms. I'm going to run us through some key terminology, some theory, a little bit of research and policy, and then Emma will share an array of pedagogical strategies in line with creativity and stuff, okay? So oral language, our first definition. So oral language, as most of us know, is the spoken language. So it encompasses both speaking and listening, so our receptive and our expressive language. And this is how we communicate as humans. But as teachers, it's really important that we support children's oral language development because we know that strong oral language is linked to really, I suppose, literacy abilities, also academic abilities overall, but also the child's holistic development too. That's oral language. Our second definition is creativity, and this has come directly from the OECD. So what is creativity? It's the competence to engage productively in the generation, evaluation and improvement of ideas that can result in original and effective solutions, advances in knowledge and impactful expressions of imagination. So given the day that's in it, obviously it's April Fool's Day, so myself and Emma came up with a few April Fools, and we'd like you maybe to reflect or think about the different facts we're going to show you and think to yourselves, are these an April Fool or are they not? They're kind of like true or false statements, I suppose, related to oral language. So our first, 90% of classroom time is dedicated to explicit oral language instruction. What do we think? Is that an April Fool's or not? 90% of classroom time is dedicated to explicit oral language instruction. That is a fool. That is not correct. That's an April Fool. So in fact, research shows that it's actually the opposite. Approximately 8 to 10% of classroom time is dedicated to explicit oral language instructions. That's very, very low. Our second fool, April Fools. During lessons, teachers speak for approximately 50% of the time. So do teachers spend 50% of the time talking? That is another April Fool's. So typically teachers talk for approximately 70 to 89% of the time. So really, we do dominate the classroom talk, which is something we're going to come back to later on. Our third one, many teachers ask over 100 questions a day. This one is true, but the majority of these are what we call closed recall-based questions. So here are 3 examples of closed recall-based questions. So the first one, how many children are in the picture? 5. What colour is the bear by the door? Pink. How many tentacles are there? 3. So these are closed questions. Now there is room for closed questions in our practice, but we want to avoid too many closed questions, and we want to emphasise open-ended questions because these really encourage back and forth dialogue with the children. So we want to avoid what we call a monologic classroom and promote lots of talk, lots of dialogue, and also open-ended questions are quite good for promoting the children's critical thinking abilities as well. So while we've shared an array of April Fools or maybe stats and different facts, these do kind of provide lessons for us, or they kind of maybe encourage us to think or reflect on our practice as teachers. So considering teachers dominate classroom talk and maybe we do focus a lot more on closed questions, we need to think about the type of talk we use, how we promote oral language, and the quality of teacher talks. That's something we're going to really focus on today. And we don't want to overwhelm you and say, oh, I have to completely change my practice. No, what we're doing, we just need to kind of make small changes perhaps just to really enhance the literacy and the conversations in the classroom. So there is a quote that says that reading and writing floats on a sea of talk, and there we have our lovely little image there. And basically, what that means is oral language is the foundation of literacy. So really, children need to be really competent in their spoken language and oral language before we really start to develop reading and writing abilities. So strong oral language skills will really help children reading and their writing. Furthermore, it will also help with their general academic achievement as well. So if we think about all the curriculum subjects we have, not only in primary school but in post-primary education as well, children need to have a really strong grasp of language in order to access the curriculum. So really it's so important for academic abilities and for literacy. And again, beyond literacy and academics, oral language is really needed to develop the child holistically. This is a fabulous quote from Anya Cregan. It says that promoting the development of oral language in the primary school will not only result in improved communication and better academic outcomes, but it will contribute fundamentally to the essence of the child. So really oral language is needed to help the children to communicate, to make friends, to express their needs, and it's also associated with like behaviour and self-regulation abilities as well. So we have a look at some of our big thinkers, mainly in Europe. So Laura Malaguzzi with the Reggio Emilia approach, Maria Montessori, Frebel, and even some of the Nordic countries. These approaches and philosophies place a huge emphasis on the holistic development of the child. And interestingly, they really promote oral language development, but they promote the development of oral language through playful pedagogies and the creative pedagogies such as maybe socio-dramatic play, drama, and the visual arts, which is something Emma's going to focus on a little bit more later on. In terms of our policy context, as we know, oral language is a key strand in the primary school curriculum. As well, being a communicator and using language is one of 7 key competencies in the primary curriculum framework. And in our most recent literacy, numeracy, and digital literacy strategy, we know that oral language is highlighted there in terms of the need for children to understand and appreciate words and language and to be able to communicate. And interestingly, the words playful and engaging interactions are mentioned there, which really lines up well with creative pedagogies too. So what does this mean? It means that successful pedagogy should be deliberate and it should be explicit. So we can't rely on, I suppose, children learning oral language by chance. We really need to facilitate this and plan it really, really well. We need to really focus on what we call high quality input, which I'm going to speak about more in a minute. Opportunities for lots of output, and we need to scaffold the children's development and also give them a lot of feedback. So I'm going to talk about input in a minute and Emma will talk about output. So firstly, what is input? So this is when we really expose the children to rich language. They need a lot of opportunities to hear varied and structured language through sentence stems, modelling and explicit teaching.
One of our most important roles as teachers, just one of them, is to create opportunities for meaningful interaction and dialogue. And we can do that by engaging children in rich and hands-on experiences that invite them to explore ideas and express their thinking. Now, there are lots of ways to do this, and I just want to refer back to the definition of creativity that Ali shared earlier. It's all about developing dispositions towards innovation and critical thinking, and that's what we really want to emphasise here. So creative output is so much more than arts and crafts. We can engage children creatively through play or through a reasonable amount of challenge. There are a few texts on the slide here that have inspired a few suggestions for that. But we want to emphasise that oral language isn't developed in isolation. It thrives in dynamic and hands-on experiences. I just want to hone in on the idea of challenge. So here it's not just an obstacle, it's a conversation starter, because the truth of the matter is when things are too easy, there's not much to say. But when something pushes us to think or to problem solve or to try, that's where the real dialogue begins. So it's important that we acknowledge that this might mean that those meaningful opportunities will look less like this slightly curved line and more like this. Learning isn't a straight line, and problems are not roadblocks. They're conversation starters. They will naturally prompt us to observe, to evaluate, to problem solve, and to sense make. So even though it looks messy and it might be a bit noisy in the classroom, when children are engaged, these opportunities are so rich and they really do support so much just beyond their oral language. It's their inclination to take risks, to innovate, and to think critically. And there's a lot of magic for us as teachers in seeing a child go from, oh, how could I do that, to look what I have done. And it's a little bit like putting a webinar together. Our role in Output now is to facilitate children's use of rich language through focus, scaffolding, and feedback. So that's where learners are supported through prompting and extension to refine and expand their language knowledge. So when we are scaffolding, we're basing our support on the child's level of language, and we're gradually reducing that support as the child gains competence. So this might look like moving beyond that traditional teacher-pupil interaction and facilitating collaborative discussions between children. And emphasis there on between the children. So where they're prompted to build on each other's ideas. So accountable talk sentence stems are very helpful to support this. We can also extend the talk by asking open-ended questions or by guiding the children to use target vocabulary. Ali will be talking more about that later on. And promoting deeper thinking just by encouraging connections and justifications. So this slide breaks down 4 types of feedback that we can give to children during learning. The examples shown are adapted from Anya Cregan's work, which we reference quite a lot here. We're very big fans of Anya Cregan, and demonstrate the types of feedback in the context of a music lesson. So we have elaboration. That's where we take what a child says and we jazz it up with richer language. Corrective guidance, where we kind of gently tweak what a child says to make it more accurate. Extended explanation, which is adding extra details to build deeper understanding. And contingent questioning. So that is asking thoughtful questions that will help the children to expand their thinking.
So here is a little sneak preview into the text that we have centered this webinar around. It's a wonderful wordless picture book called Professional Crocodile. We won't give too much away, but essentially it's about a crocodile and he's dressed up, ready for work, and we follow him and we learn a lot about him on his journey to work. And that is what we're going to base our webinar on. So I mentioned input there a minute ago. So in terms of input tonight, I'm going to focus on vocabulary in terms of input and then modelling through think alouds. So in terms of vocabulary and choosing words to teach, I suppose as teachers, it might be a little bit easier to locate words or to find appropriate words to teach when the book has text. But Professional Crocodile is a wordless picture book, so there actually is no text. So myself and Emma come up with a routine that might help us to think of words to teach in this case. So a key message I suppose we want to drive home tonight is that as the educator, we need to be really, really familiar and we need to have quite in-depth knowledge of the book we are using. So really, it's not enough just to read the book for the first time with the children. We need to spend a lot of time planning in advance. That could be the nights before, the week before. You need to know the book really well in order to capitalize on it and to get the most out of the learning experience. So with that in mind, you need to spend a lot of time looking closely at the illustrations in the wordless picture book. So pay attention to the characters, the actions, the settings, the expressions, and the plot, like what's happening, where, how are things presented, what are the characters, what might the dialogue be between the characters. As well as that, think about the language you'd use to tell the story. So if you were the author and if you were maybe narrating it, what words would you use to describe what's going on? But again, you need to go beyond simple words. You need to think about rich language. So how can we really enrich the children's vocabulary and what words can we focus on? So with that in mind, we really should be focusing on tier 2 words mainly, which I'll talk through in a minute. And then a selection of tier 3 words would be quite important too. So I'm going to explain the tiered word. So Beck, McKeown, and Coogan came up with this model called the tiered approach to choosing vocabulary. So essentially, they categorize vocabulary into three different categories at tier 1, 2, and 3. So if we have a look at this illustration from our wordless picture book, Professional Crocodile, we can see it's the crocodile's morning routine. He's getting ready to go to work. He's looking in the mirror. We can see the facade of the building he lives in and so on. So some tier 1 words. So tier 1 words are words that kind of the children will have in their everyday language. So these are words we don't need to spend time teaching because the children are likely to know them already and to use them maybe at home, talking with their parents or their families, or even with their friends at school. These are words children are likely to already have, so we don't really need to spend time teaching them. It wouldn't be the best use of our time. So some tier 1 words that might match this picture could be crocodile, bathroom, mirror, sink, toothbrush. They're very basic words children will likely know already. Now, on the other hand, tier 2 words are really high frequency words, and they're called high utility. So these are words that can be used across a lot of different subjects and domains, and are needed to access and to understand text. So if we have a look at some tier 2 words that correspond with this image, it might be words like grooming. He's looking at his reflection. We can see he's glancing, his posture, this is neighborhood, we can see shutters, he's looking after his hygiene, this is morning routine. So these are words children need to know in order to comprehend text. So really we know that vocabulary is really an integral part to comprehension. So if children are reading a text and they don't know what the word means, they're not going to understand the text. That's why you really want to focus on words. But tier 2 words are important because if you were to have a look in your school library, these words will probably come up in a selection of books regardless of the type of book or maybe the topic or theme. And that's why they're important, because they're kind of present in a lot of different books. Now, tier 3 words, they're not words you want to ignore, but these are words that are domain specific or subject specific. They're not as frequently kind of found in books, but they are important if we're looking at a particular topic or theme in depth. So if you're exploring maybe the theme of reptiles or crocodiles, you could really bring in some nice informational text to get some rich tier 3 words. And also, if the child is reading an informational piece about crocodiles, they need to know what the word reptilian or those kind of words mean. So definitely there is place to bring some in, but they're not needed as much for everyday reading as tier 2 words. That's their kind of our tier 3. The key message is focus on that middle tier mainly. So we came up with a little vocabulary teaching routine that you could use when exploring this wordless picture book. So there are 7 steps here. Again, you might adapt this depending on the children in your class or their needs or their abilities. And also the order isn't definite. You can change the order around to suit you as well. So we really want the children to use the words in a variety of ways and to get kind of multi-sensory approach to word learning. So firstly, if we look at this image again from our wordless picture book, the same one, the morning routine, we're going to take the word reflection. So the crocodile is looking at his reflection in the mirror. So if you are focusing on the word reflection, you would say to the children, so in this book, the crocodile is looking at his reflection. Let's have a look closely at the word reflection. Can we all say the word reflection together? And the children might say with you, reflection. So then the children are hearing the word and they're saying the word. Now, after that, it's not enough for the children just to hear it and just to say it. They need to see that word in context and in writing as well. So they need to see the print, they need to hear it, and they need to be able to say it. So even though it's a wordless picture book, it would be best practice to write a sentence. Maybe you could gather them up at the top of the class and show them the book, and maybe do it in a flip chart or on your interactive whiteboard, but they need to see it in writing to see how it's spelled and what it looks like as well. So here is an example of a sentence with the word reflection. My dog was confused when he saw his reflection in a puddle. So again, they're seeing it written, they're hearing it, and they're saying it. Now, after that, it's not enough for the children. We can't assume they will get the full meaning of the word just from using contextual cues. We need to really explicitly explain the meaning of the word. And we need to use what we call child-friendly definitions, like definitions that children understand. So you might say, reflection is when something like a mirror shows the image of something back to you. So again, they're saying it, they're hearing it, they're reading it, and then they're getting a child-friendly definition. After this, give them lots of chances to talk about the word, to relate it to the context of their life. You might maybe use a think loud, you might model, you might say, my reflection, or I can see my reflection in the spoon from my lunchbox, but not from my water bottle. It's not as reflective or shiny, so let them apply it to their lives as contextualize for them. Again, number 5, you will need to show them the image from the word as picture book to reinforce. And actually, that step 5 you could use throughout steps 1 to 4 to really consolidate it as well. Number 6, you could do a little activity around examples and non-examples. You can maybe have a chat. You could be like a reflection. It is seeing your reflection in sunglass lenses. It is the same as the moon's image in the sea at night, but your reflection is not your shadow. It's not a drawing of yourself. It's not a photo of yourself. So play around with the word boundaries and say, do your non-examples and your examples. And finally, allow the children a lot of time to play with the words and to really experience the language and have fun with it in a creative, playful way. And number 7, Emma's going to really delve into that later on in the webinar. And my last little bit on input, so I've looked now at vocabulary, is the power of modelling rich, sophisticated vocabulary using what we call complex syntax. So we need to model the language, let them hear full sentences with lots of words, and we can do that using what we call think alouds. So the next slide here, we can see some examples of think aloud. So this is our cover of the book, Professional Crocodile, once again. And here are some examples you could use in your think alouds. You could say, the crocodile is looking in the mirror. They must be getting ready. I wonder where they're going. And then the children are kind of like listening to you and they're thinking, and it might extend their thinking a little further as well. Another one, the crocodile looks very professional. And again, that rich vocabulary. They're wearing a shirt and it looks like they're trying to decide on which tie to wear. This makes me think they must be going to work. Or the bright colours and the polka dots on the crocodile shirt makes me think they must be very stylish. And the idea is if you do this enough with the children and if you model a lot of think alouds, then they begin to pick up on it and they will start doing it themselves. And they'll start sharing their opinions of the story, maybe drawing inferences as well. So for example, if we look at this illustration, they might say, the first picture makes me think the crocodile is happy. He's listening to music and it's sunny. I think he's in a rush though. Jam on toast, a quick breakfast, and he looks like he's drinking that coffee in a hurry. He must be late for work then, or maybe he's running for a bus. That's some examples of think alouds, and how if we do this enough, the children will start to do it themselves. And I've seen that in my own practice, and Emma will agree with me too.
For sure. So building on the input of teacher modelling or thinking aloud, visual thinking strategies offer a very rich opportunity for us to focus the attention on the children's talk. So instead of the teacher doing all of the thinking aloud, the children are invited to look at an image and respond to questions like, what do you see? What makes you say that? And what more can we find? And they are given space to share and to articulate their ideas, to build on each other's thoughts and to back it up with evidence then from the image. So our feedback in this instance, or how we affirm the children's ideas, is really paramount to the type of culture for talk that we foster in our classrooms. So rather than affirming with very good or excellent, we want to affirm feedback in a more non-evaluative or neutral manner. So this really supports children's confidence to take risks without the fear of being wrong. Now, I thought this was something that I was good at as a teacher, but I had someone out from the lab gallery in Dublin to deliver a visual thinking strategy session with my last sixth class, and the curator got so much more out of them, and I was going, what does she have that I don't? But the children said that they could always tell by my face if they weren't quite hitting the nail on the head. So our body language is really important here too. Now, paraphrasing or recasting the children's contributions also affirm them without evaluating them. But in paraphrasing, we also have the opportunity to recast the children's contributions with richer or more accurate vocabulary. So essentially, while we're scaffolding, we have the opportunity to deliver input with a visual context that supports both us and the children. So here are some examples of how that might look. And the child might say, there are tons of monkeys in that cage. And we'd say, you notice that there are a lot of monkeys in this enclosure. So we're using more sophisticated language there to recast what the child is saying. The child might say that's not a real place for monkeys to live. What you're saying is this is an artificial habitat. What makes you say that? So you're recasting and then you're encouraging the child to extend by looking for evidence in the picture to justify their original statement. The child might say, they're acting like humans. She is on the phone. And you might say, yes, the monkeys appear to mimic humans here. As you said, this monkey is on the phone. So at this point, we've set a rationale for thoughtful oral language practice, and we've emphasised the steps that support it. So teacher input, meaningful opportunities for output, scaffolding and feedback. So now we're going to explore some creative cross-curricular ideas that can support children's engagement and meaningful opportunities for talk. So this is our first creative approach, engaging children in debates, but in role. So this could work particularly well if you were looking at the persuasive genre. So I'll draw your attention first of all to the image on the left-hand side. We kind of notice that the crocodile appears to be quite uneasy. We can infer that this is likely due to the poster behind him. This visual prompt could catalyse a debate about whether animals should live outside of the environments they're naturally adapted to. And this is definitely a theme that runs through the book, or it's a question that's raised as we go through the book. So how do we bring it into practice? So first of all, this is just a suggestion, by the way, but we were thinking we must put some structure on it because we're throwing out some fairly broad ideas here. So we can divide the class into pairs. Each pair will take on the role of a crocodile. So one crocodile is pro living outside its natural habitat. Maybe they have better access to food or protection from predators, while the other crocodile will argue the drawbacks, so maybe discomfort or health risks. So after this, the children should be encouraged to step into character. They might adopt a crocodile voice or a stance to immerse themselves in role, because sometimes taking on the role of someone else can really make us feel more invested and confident in our arguments. So drama really is a wonderful ally and subject in its own right. But beyond that, we can provide children with support by scaffolding, by providing sentence stems or language frames. So things like, I believe that living outside my habitat is beneficial because, or however, if I stay in this new environment, I might face challenges like, and whatever the children want to bring in there. And they will round out their arguments or their points by using not only knowledge from the picture book. So first of all, we can look at the visual literacy aspect. Myself and Ali actually had a discussion about this and how the crocodile is represented throughout the book. And we notice that he's represented as being much bigger where he's comfortable, so near the water or in his dreams. But then he seems disproportionately smaller when he's in crowds. So we know from Serafini's work that the size of a character can indicate their sense of power, and we kind of get a sense of maybe this crocodile isn't super happy living outside of its natural habitat. But children might also draw on informational texts that they've encountered across the curriculum, or perhaps informational texts that might be in their school or class library. And this can help to support their ideas to formulate robust arguments. So time to share is exceptionally important, and it's definitely at the root of the oral language practice here. So allowing time for the pairs to share their perspectives in front of the class, or even to have them to mingle with other pairs so they hear differing viewpoints. So these exchanges, they'll reinforce not only the listening skills, but they'll also encourage students to refine their arguments, because we'd be encouraging the children to give feedback to each other too. And we can, of course, hop in there to give our feedback and scaffolding. So something that might be motivating for children and will allow them to communicate with an authentic audience would be recording their debate as a podcast. So once you've permission to do so, this could be shared through Google Classroom or Seesaw or the school website, or even by sending a QR code home. apps or websites such as Audacity or Vocaroo. They're long-standing soldiers that are still there and very useful for recording a podcast. But I'd always advise you to have a look at your school's digital learning plan and your acceptable usage policy and see what might be suggested there. But it's a lovely way to share the work with parents, and it's also lovely if you keep digital portfolios for assessment purposes too. So another approach that we can use that's rooted in drama is Mantle of the Expert. And this is where children take on real world problems, but as experts, but in a fictional context. So here are some examples that are connected with the book. So with our professional crocodile, first of all, the children can go into role as fashion consultants. So children might design outfits for the crocodile or a crocodile based on different jobs that he or she might have, because we don't actually know the crocodile's job until the end of the book. So bringing in a bit of visual art here using fabric and fibre, they can design costumes in role for the approval of the crocodile. So they must explain their choices, negotiate with their peers, and adapt their ideas based on feedback. Now, more so from the peers, but the teacher can definitely pop in role too once the teacher isn't dominating. So feel free to pop in for a little bit and unleash your inner Miranda Priestley. So next, the children could work in role or as experts as city planners. So here children would collaborate to create an animal-friendly environment. So this could be based on either the city in the story or on their own locality. So using the space in the room, the children would use props, cardboard, materials, chalk, whatever is going, and they can reimagine a familiar space or map out what they imagine the space to be based off the images in the story. And these ideas, they would work with that space to make it more crocodile friendly based on their reading and their discussions and their learning about crocodiles. And these ideas would be pitched to the mayor for approval. So that might be the teacher or it might be another student in the class. Or if you really wanted to bring in your authentic audience, if you've got a very, very open and willing principal who might like to be a crocodile mayor, you know, that's something that you could pitch at your next Crow Park. So finally, we have got our transport design engineers. I'm not sure if I made that up or not, but I was trying to come up with professions and I was like, God, in my day it was teaching or nursing. I'm not really sure what they're called beyond this. So I might have taken some creative license here. But children are tasked here with developing a mode of transport that is safe for crocodiles and shields them from the stressful commute on public transport. We all know about that. But children are encouraged to be as innovative as possible. So they might decide to use light furniture, emphasis on light there, health and safety, fabric or cardboard to develop their ideas. Or if it's a thing that you're working with limited space, they could just design a mini prototype based on the space. But the emphasis here is that the children are working in role that whole time and that the teacher would engage with the children in role too. So this is something that's very quick, but could be woven into any study of an image. So thought tracking is a drama technique. And in this instance anyways, the children would locate themselves in the picture as a character and voice their character's inner thoughts based on what they see. So we can encourage the children here to draw on the context for their ideas. My eyes always drawn to the child who is eating the crisps and the man beside him and the smell. Sorry to anybody who disagrees with me there. Or even just asking the children to consider their senses and how these might be impacted by their surroundings. So we're working with a wordless picture book. So the images would naturally spark our imagination. They kind of invite us to fill in the blanks. So without a preset dialogue, we have the freedom to create our own narratives and voice our interpretations. And even myself and Ali, when we were discussing the book, we actually had so many different theories about it. So on the surface, it looks like one story, but the reality is every time you revisit it, you see something different that makes you think differently. But just using the images is a lovely way to invite the children to step into the fictional world, and they can build out the story by responding in role. So a good way to prompt this is to consider what the characters might be saying. So to start with the dialogue. And this isn't quite related to drama, but we could also explore dialogue here using Chatterpick. So this is an app that lets you turn any picture into a talking image. So you take the picture, you draw a line over the character's mouth, and you record using your own voice. So you can kind of bring the characters to life in that respect. And it's really lovely for creative storytelling and really nice for smaller groups. And we were saying earlier that, if you had a child who was particularly shy and found it hard to kind of involve themselves in the drama initially, that it would be a nice way in. Now, this is a stepped approach to looking at musical tempo to inspire descriptive language for movement. So this is because the book is very much based on the crocodile's commute. So we're following him around for a lot. Alison said this earlier, and I feel bad for saying it as well. It feels strange to say that we're following him, but we essentially are. We're following the crocodile on his commute, and in a retelling of the commute, we want the children to be thinking beyond he walked or he ran. So it's hoped that by connecting the sound with the visual story here, that children would be supported to retell the narrative using more engaging vocabulary that vividly describes how a character moves. So first of all, the children would listen to excerpts from Carnival of the Animals that showcase different tempos. So they're readily available on YouTube and they're very short excerpts. Now, there's none that are specifically about crocodiles. Apparently, fossils is, but I'm not too sure. I think it might be a bit of a broad bracket. But in isolation, the sounds can be used to kind of explore different aspects, or they could be applied to other animals too. So these are just some that work. But the teacher input here would revolve around introducing or revising the musical concept of tempo, so whether the music is fast or slow, and prompting discussion based on the excerpts with targeted questions. And there's room here for the teacher to think aloud. So I have a sample of that on the screen. About their own response to the music, because this would help to scaffold children's understanding, because they're discussing the music together and they're sense making about how tempo affects the mood or a sense of place. So next, the children would be invited to physically respond to the music through movement. So the teachers can model expressive movement. Now, it doesn't have to be mad dancing. We can do this through walking, because we are commuting at the end of the day. The commute can be as exaggerated or as calm as we want it to be. But the teachers can model movements that correspond with the varying tempos. So a faster tempo might look like very brisk walking. But this kind of scaffolding just helps students to internalize the connection between the music and the physical expression, and encourages the children to explore, but most importantly here, articulate their interpretations. So our next step here would be getting the children to match the musical excerpts to parts of the book depicting the crocodile's journey. So they've listened to the music, they've kind of explored it through movement, and now they're going, well, which of these is the most appropriate in the context of these pictures? So the teacher input here would help, or would involve guiding the matching up process. So asking the children prompt questions and highlighting key cues in both the text and the music. So why do you think this excerpt matches this picture? What do you think, which piece of music is most effective to show that he's in a rush? Why? So there's a lot of potential questioning there. This scaffolding supports the children's output, because they're making connections and they're describing their reasoning to justify their choices. So there's a lot going on there by way of language output. But there's also great opportunity here to brainstorm and elicit previously learned vocabulary that might reflect the pieces of music in tandem with the visual images. So it's a good opportunity for the teacher to reinforce, but also potentially teach new words that the children could use to support their own retelling of the crocodile's commute. So there's tons of tier 2 words that we've kind of thrown out there, just to give you a bit of inspiration, and to just look at what is possible and how interesting we can make the story or the retellings sound. So the next idea encompasses using pictures as a visual score. So using this book or using this picture or any wordless picture book, any picture book really, the children can engage in discussion on what sounds they might hear and how they might mimic those sounds. So they might do this through exploring percussion instruments. An example here is the crocodile going down in the lift. We can see that on the left-hand side. And we might hear a ding either side. So that might be made with the triangle. And then as the crocodile moves down through the floors, we might hear a light scraping on the guiro. And that can indicate that he's moving down on the lift. But the children can naturally engage in discussion because they're hypothesizing about the different sounds that the instruments might make. They're experimenting to see what different sounds they might get out of the instruments if they use them in different ways. They're listening to each other, they're listening to the instruments, they're evaluating the effects, and they're giving feedback. So there's, again, a huge amount of language potential here. In the event that you don't have access to percussion instruments, body percussion or vocal percussion could support this too. But also, just in the spirit of being creative, found object percussion can help to nurture creativity in more than just a musical capacity here. So the children could explore objects around the room and the kinds of noises that they might make. So that could work really well to kind of, I suppose, establish a really rich soundscape. So if you have access to devices incorporating an app such as GarageBand or tools on the Chrome Music Lab site might be worth looking at too. They're just something to consider if you have groups, because again, it might contribute to making that very rich soundscape. The same idea could be explored through virtual field trips. So how would a different context affect the sounds that we hear or that we might hear or that we might produce? So now we're on to visual art. Here we're examining one of the illustrations, but this time we're looking at the concept of colour and considering how the artist might have explored it. Now, this presents a sense of challenge. Again, that's kind of where the dialogue happens, because the artist isn't here to tell us exactly what they did or how they went about this. And there's a lovely safety in that because it kind of lets us speculate safely without the fear of being wrong. So we're inviting children to the conversation by asking them what they see, what colours they see, before encouraging them to speculate on how the artist might have created those colours. So the children are invited then to try and match the artist's palette. So they can do that by colour mixing themselves, using just a palette of primary and achromatic colours. There's lots of opportunities here as well to use subject-specific vocabulary such as hue or tone or tint or shade. The children can mix directly onto paper plates or palettes or using Ziploc bags and then discuss what they see as the colours change. Before they do, though, in this sort of introductory phase, it's a wonderful opportunity to facilitate your own think aloud. So here's an example of a kind of script for a think aloud, and it's based on mixing that kind of golden ochre colour of the woman's hair. So this thinking aloud has benefits beyond that sort of input and subsequent internalization, because by thinking aloud, especially here when you're mixing paints, you're demonstrating how imperfect and imprecise the process of mixing colours is. And that's like many other creative things and actually many other things that children encounter in school. And it's great to show that your ideas might change and how that's okay. And it's very powerful for teachers to model that and to show that in some cases that we're trying to figure it out too. Just a quick point, but you'd be surprised at the conversation you can elicit from paint chips or samples. They are useful for colour matching in visual art, but they are an even better stimulus for conversation. So things like how might I mix this colour? You can get the children to experiment in a hands-on way or just to speculate based on their own knowledge of colour theory. Why do you think this shade was called whatever the shade is called? And then what would you call this shade yourself? So another concept of art that we could look at here is texture. So asking the children to identify textures and how they're implied. So there's a lot of smooth textures here, but the trees have quite a rich texture. So one way that we could get the children thinking about how textures can be created is to ask them to recreate them, but we can make it more challenging by removing access to brushes. So letting the children kind of experiment with bric-a-brac and the kind of mark that those items make when they're dipped in paint. So all of that stuff that ends up in your top drawer or in your yard coat pockets, that can be the key to having a really, really rich oral language/visual art lesson. So staying with visual art, here is one way that the children might explore creative storytelling, and this is by using temporary construction. So this is your encouragement to collect interesting scraps of wrapping paper, cards, or leftovers from any other creative pursuits in the classroom. But by using scraps of paper, the children can iterate and explore their ideas. I can only kind of compare this to when you look at a cloud and you see a shape, but your friend might interpret it differently, but it makes sense to you. So the children might see different things in different shapes and different colours, and that might prompt them to kind of think about alternative ideas. So it supports their thinking, and it's a really enjoyable way to promote discussion. And it offers great opportunity for scaffolding and feedback, and for us to kind of get in there and provide that rich language input while they're engaged. And we have that lovely visual context to support us too. So our last stop in terms of the creative pedagogies this evening is we're looking at poetry. So again, to bring up Anya Cregan, she actually recommends increasing children's encounters with poetry so that they're given opportunities to experience and explore language creatively in the classroom. So poems lend themselves to really enjoyable and rich discussions because they're so full of nuance and so full of creativity. And in this instance, anyways, these poems kind of show a representation of crocodiles and how they might be portrayed in literature, but we kind of get a nice snapshot. So we're not reading for absolutely ages, and we get to see a little bit of variety. But in terms of how the crocodiles are portrayed, it isn't always nice. So, based on our own professional crocodile and our experience with him, which has been very positive, the children could be encouraged to rewrite the poems in pairs to reflect the crocodile in a more positive light. If we wanted to try and support this, we could also look at blackout poetry. Now, this can be quite challenging, and I know from experience, but if we keep it open ended, we can make very random poems and they can kind of go off into different subjects and topics. And that's lovely. It's lovely to give the kids a bit of creative freedom just to explore their own ideas. In this instance, we kind of imposed a bit of a challenge in that we wanted a blackout poem that was more affirming than insulting to fictional crocodiles. So here we have Tommy, you are the bravest croc in the whole river, the only one who dares to look. Now, this isn't a particularly affirming piece of literature when it comes to crocodiles or for crocodiles who might be reading it. So our interpretation is, of course they'll see you. You're so clever, 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 clever. I'm the cleverest croc in the whole river. Found poetry is another lovely creative practice where you can take words or phrases or passages from existing texts, so things like newspapers or books or advertisements, and then you can arrange them to form a poem. So in this instance, we have just described words or thoughts to the first few images in Professional Crocodile to show you how this could be approached with a wordless book. So we have dreaming of peace, coffee. What does my horoscope say today? Monday morning, I better run. So we're kind of getting that sense of someone who's up and about, and it's morning time, and they're on the go. So what we've just done here is looked at creating really small 3-section poems and just using those random phrases. So we've got the first two there, they're using the exact same phrases. We've got coffee and hello stranger, and then alarm clock thrills. But then when we switch the words into a different order, so alarm clock trills, coffee, and hello stranger, it completely changes the meaning of the poem. And even this lends itself to such rich discussion because it's such a small change. But in my experience, children just really, really love working with this kind of I suppose, approach because it's so open, it's so creative. It doesn't have to necessarily make complete sense. And it can make sense and be interpreted differently by different people. And there's lovely freedom in that. So this quote from John Dewey just really speaks to the vibe of our webinar. We want to engage children meaningfully. We're looking at developing the child as a person, not just under one facet of the curriculum. And we can support the children to engage to their very best when we have opportunities to teach. We have opportunities then to scaffold when we get in there, and we have that meaningful context to apply that rich language input.
And just, we thought that we'd share some other wordless or mostly wordless picture books with you. So if you enjoyed Professional Crocodile and if you'd like to explore more picture books, here are some examples. And these are all, I suppose, the kind of similar theme. They're about like animals and habitats and belonging and being kind of in captivity and stuff. So these are a few blurbs that go with them. So if you want to maybe take a picture of the covers of the books, and definitely what you could do is you could apply the pedagogies or strategies that Emma went through to these wordless picture books. And yeah, these slides will be shared later on, but they could be picture books you could definitely develop further, a bit like how we've done here. And then if we just have a look, we have a few events coming up with the Literacy Association of Ireland. So the next webinar in this series is called A Closer Look at Dyslexia, and that is scheduled to be on the 13th of May, which is a Tuesday at 7 p.m. So if you're interested in attending that, we would encourage you to save the date. As well as that, we're very excited to announce that our spring edition of Literacy News is due to be published within the next week or so. So do keep an eye out on our social media because that will contain a variety of rich articles across the educational continuum from early childhood into post-primary education. So do look out for that. That'll be published next week. As well as that, our conference for 2025 is scheduled to take place on Friday the 7th of November and Saturday the 8th. And we really would love to see plenty of primary school teachers attending the conference this year. And finally, if you would like to see more of our work and to maybe keep in touch with what the Literacy Association of Ireland are doing, here are our social media handles. So we are on Instagram at Literacy Ireland. We also have a LinkedIn page, Literacy Association of Ireland. And we are new to TikTok as well. So if you have TikTok, you can follow us there too. And finally, on behalf of myself and Emma and the Literacy Association of Ireland, we'd like to say a big thank you to everyone for attending tonight, especially on this wonderful sunny Tuesday evening. So Mila Buikas, and again, thank you so much to our 3 education centres. I'm also aware there are some quite detailed questions in the chat. So if you'd like to email us, our emails are there as well. So Carol, I think, and there was another one in the queue, and Eve, if you do want to email us, we could follow up with those questions because I think they warrant quite a lengthy answer as well. So there are 2 emails, Alison and Emma, so do feel free to get in touch with us if you'd like over email. So thank you so much on behalf of Emma, the LAI, to you all and to our education centres and to Aideen as well.
And ladies, I just have to briefly pop in to give our sincere thanks to you both this evening. What an amazing session. So many creative ideas, so many wonderful ideas. I absolutely love the idea of the paint chart, how simple. You've been so informative and affirming and full of guidance and practical tips and knowledge tonight that can be applied immediately in classroom contexts. I really appreciate your preparation and your engagement with people tonight and for giving up your evening. And I would just like to give a nod as well to the Literacy Association of Ireland. Their webinars are second to none, and we are always so delighted to host them and to count them as one of our very well appreciated partners in it. So thank you so very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sadie.
We'll be in touch, ladies. Thank you very, very much.